I would get an email every time someone would sign up, and I'd have to click approve because that was the weird workflow that they had. And so you get your first email, and it's like tom@gmail.com, and then sarah@yahoo.com, and then it's like Larry at Intel, and then it's Gary at US Navy, and it grew so quickly. And
can you give us a couple numbers of impact right now? Like, I mean, how many people are using it?
We can't tell exactly how many MCP servers people have shipped, but our understanding is it's the most popular framework for building MCP servers today. And it's responsible for just a huge percentage of servers that people are shipping. It's not just how you get started with MCP. What we really try hard on is making it so that it's how you can scale your server to production.
If I'm a junior developer today, where should I start?
Two things.
Hello and welcome everyone to the fourth episode of our podcast here, The Merge, brought to you right from the CodeRabbit office here in San Francisco. My name is Hendrik. I'm a developer advocate here at CodeRabbit. And today I am super pleased to welcome Bill Easton, the core maintainer of FastMCP and also director of product at Elastic. And I'm super honored to have you here today, Bill. I hope you had a pleasant journey into San Francisco. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me at your beautiful office today. The view of the bridge is just incredible. Again, my name is Bill Easton. I work on observability at Elastic, so open telemetry, AI, bringing those things together. And I'm a core maintainer on FastMCP with Jeremiah Lowen. And so I'm really excited to talk about FastMCP today. Maybe we'll talk about open telemetry, but very excited to be here.
Yeah, that's great. Well, obviously, FastMCP has been incredibly popular. I mean, if you have been using an LLM to code within the last 9 months and you asked it to build an MCP server, maybe out of a fast API that you had before, chances are very likely, if you're coding in Python, it chose FastMCP to implement it. So, but for those people who are hearing FastMCP for the first time, can you give us a brief rundown?
Yeah, so MCP is a spec. It's an implementation available in a couple of languages, but that doesn't mean that it's easy to use. And that doesn't mean that it's easy to build an MCP server with. And so the idea behind FastMCP was, what if we could bridge that gap? What if we could take the spec, the reference implementation, and we could sprinkle some decorators, some magic into it so that as a new developer, as someone who maybe has never written Python before, you could spin up an MCP server, you could add tools to it, you could learn what resources are in 20 lines of code, in 15 lines of code. And those lines of code would be the lines of code that you need to make an MCP server and nothing else. And then you can kind of have that magical experience of building your first tool in 10 lines, and you can read the 10 lines and understand what they're doing. We think of FastMCP as kind of the magic extra layer that really makes it possible to get started really quickly.
I mean, I used the product. I built an MCP server with this 9 months ago. I was amazed by how simple it was. What was the journey to that simplicity? Because I understand that actually at the start of MCP, the protocol in November 24, it was not quite that simple, right?
Yeah, again, a protocol doesn't help you build an application. Like there's a big stretch to go from the HTTP protocol to a web server, and there's a big stretch to go from the MCP spec to a server that you can build. And so this isn't exactly my story to tell. It's Jeremiah's story to tell because he started the project. But my understanding was he wanted to build an MCP server. And he got started and he thought, man, this is hard. There's a lot of boilerplate here. There's a lot of extra stuff. And so the first version was just, what's the smallest layer that we could build on top of the MCP Python SDK that would make it a really lovable product experience, a really lovable experience for developers. And Jeremiah didn't go out and force everybody to use it. He just made a repo and made it public, and it kind of took off. You start seeing individual developers commenting, I built my first MCP server using an LLM, and it chose FastMCP. And then I started making issues in the project and got more involved. And so it was really just one of those things where that was what we needed in order to have a great experience. And it turns out that's what other people needed too, to have a great experience, I think is kind of why the project took off.
Yeah, can you give us a couple numbers of impact right now? Like, I mean, how many people are using it?
So I think we passed 20,000 stars pretty recently, more than 1 million downloads a day. Wow. We see lots of usage on Mac and Windows and Linux. We can't tell exactly how many MCP servers people have shipped, But our understanding is it's the most popular framework for building MCP servers today, and it's responsible for just a huge percentage of servers that people are shipping. And as I mentioned before, it's not just how you get started with MCP. What we really try hard on is making it so that it's how you can scale your server to production. And so whether you're running it in a Lambda to handle 1,000 requests a second, or you're just running it on your laptop to make a particular workflow you have easier, it's the same framework, the same tooling. Just there's always more batteries included as you want to go and solve problems like authentication with OAuth or API keys, or adding middleware to your servers to do logging or caching. And one of the things that we might talk about today, sampling, even lets you put agents inside of your servers, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, we'll come to that in just a minute. Help maybe us understand a little bit more about like what is that complexity layer that gets added as soon as something becomes so popular?
Oh, yeah. In an open source project where you go from being just one person who's trying to solve your own problem to supporting a whole community of people who are all trying to solve their own problems, there's lots of scale issues. And that's, I think, why I got invited to be a maintainer on the project, was to help scale the project to handle all of these new users and new problems. People flooding in for discussions, people flooding in for issues, people making PRs to fix their bugs, and then triaging those. With that scale, Jeremiah and I have been able to handle it largely thanks to AI agents and LLMs, and having agents help us with identifying duplicate issues in the repo, with triaging issues, with helping us make PRs and helping us review them. And so we rely a lot on our users to come to us and say, I love this so much, it's 99.9% of what I need, but there's this one thing that if you could help me with, or I have this one problem that if you could fix. And I love that. That's like the best place to be, is somebody who's using your thing, who loves it and just wants to see one more thing out of it. And with LLMs and agents and all of these tools, we can deliver those things, and we can deliver them really quickly, and we can make it a really great experience. But it's a lot of work to triage all of the issues people have. A lot of the time, it's difficult to get reproductions of issues. If somebody has a really complex pipeline they're running, and they come to you and they say, when I do these 1,000 things, I run into this problem. I can't redo those 1,000 things on my laptop. And so getting what we need out of folks in order to help them can sometimes be a big struggle. But so far, it's been just really great. It's so fun to get to talk to people who have all of these different use cases that you would never even think of, who are using MCP to solve.
I mean, I can only imagine the sheer volume of requests that you're getting. So what's your strategy? I mean, there's only really you and Jeremiah involved in managing the overhead, right? How do you make decisions on what to implement and what not to?
There are other people who do a lot of contributions, and folks from Jeremiah's companies contribute as well. I have kind of my specialties within the project, and Jeremiah has his. And so we work together to triage. So if you go to the repo and you have an issue with sampling or tools or tool transformation or mounting servers or proxies, then I might be the one to help you. If you have problems with OAuth and authentication, Jeremiah might be the one to help you. And then we communicate really regularly when we're messing with areas that the other person is responsible for. And so we just work together to make sure that we're both comfortable with what's shipping. And I think we're both really highly opinionated people about what good looks like. And with AI agents and AI tools, it's a much shorter path to being happy with the things that we're building and delivering.
Maybe you can take us for a second through like how that entire open source journey started from you to you, because it seems like a little bit of a rocket ride, almost from like the point you started first contributing. I mean, if you take a look at your open source GitHub contributions, they all kind of exploded at a certain point very rapidly. So maybe walk us a little bit through how that journey came into, and maybe also the recommendations you have for people who want to get into something that's impactful in open source as FastMCP.
So there's certainly like a rocket ship graph you can find on my GitHub for contributions. But my open source contribution started more than a decade ago. I worked on a product called BigFix a lot, and I would do consulting for BigFix, and it's like an endpoint management product for deploying patches and telling whether you have encryption on your laptop and those sorts of things. And I would work with companies, and they would ask for the same things. They'd say like, I want to know, is Windows updated? I want to know what the user's name is on the laptop. And I got tired of writing this content for everybody individually. And that's when I started my first public GitHub repo, where I just started posting this content publicly. And it grew really quickly in the BigFix community, which is a really small community. And it was kind of my first exposure to, you publish something and people just come out of the woodwork and start using it and start giving you feedback on it and reporting problems. And like the first time I got an email from someone at like Intel, or the first time I got an email from someone in the government or these various places, I was like, wow, this stuff is really useful. And then people would come to me and say, I know you don't have this problem, but I have this problem. Can you help me solve it? And that was kind of my first exposure to that environment. And then I just continued to do open source projects, open source contributions. And FastMCP is really the one where, since I've joined, there was a rocket ship before I joined, and the rocket ship has just continued to point straight up since I joined. And so that's been really awesome. But it was a lot of practice along the way of how do you interact with the community, how do you interact with the team, how do you work together to solve problems in a way that solves them for more than just you, but for a whole community of people, and how can you leverage that investment you're making to help 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people instead of just you. And so that's been really exciting to get to use kind of that in the FastMCP community and then continue to contribute in other projects.
Right. Just double clicking again on that IBM Big Fix moment, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in that story. So first of all, what exactly is IBM Big Fix, and how did that impact you the most?
Yeah, at the time it was IBM Big Fix. Now it's owned by a company called HCL, but it's just a platform for managing lots of servers and laptops and desktops. So if you're a company and you have 10 laptops, you're not using Big Fix. But if you have 1 million laptops, you're probably using Big Fix. If you have 1 million servers, you might be using Big Fix. And so at every company, there might be one Big Fix person. And so you go to a conference and you see all of the Big Fix people. And so if you have something to share, you're in a room with people who are willing and ready to consume that, because it makes their jobs easier, it makes their lives easier. And so I made this project called Community Curated Content. I called it C3. And then we would do like C3 Protect, and that would be like antivirus and hard disk encryption and security related items, and C3 Inventory, and that would be like, what's the serial number on your laptop? What version of Windows are you using? Those kinds of things. C3 Patch for like, here's the patch for Flash, here's the patch for Java, here's the patch for Chrome. Those sorts of problems where before that, everyone at all of these companies would build that themselves. And then you'd have 50 different versions made by 50 different companies, and it was just all this wasted effort. And so it was really cool to be able to just like bring that together and have a community curated set of content that had the bugs fixed in it already, that worked across all the platforms people wanted it to work on. And kind of curating that meant talking to the people who are experts in these platforms and experts in these areas and bringing their expertise together in a community way so that we could publish something that was useful. It wasn't code. It was like XML files in a GitHub repository, but it was definitely the same kind of open source mantra and open source vibe that you see today in projects.
Right. And then you told me like the big moment, or like the realization came when you saw that, okay, there's more and more people signing up.
Yeah, for sure. I would get an email every time someone would sign up, and I'd have to click approve because that was the weird workflow that they had. And so you get your first email and it's like tom@gmail.com, and then sarah@yahoo.com, and then it's like Larry at Intel, and then it's, Gary at US Navy. And it grew so quickly. And I'd of course click accept immediately. Like I want the Navy using that as quickly as possible. But then I'd reach out and I'd say, hey, what else do you need? What would be helpful when you saw this? What was the reason you clicked sign up? Like what was the most exciting thing for you? And that really allowed me to focus additional time in those areas to say, the reason people are coming to this is because of the antivirus content, because of the disk encryption content. And it's really the same way we prioritize stuff in FastMCP. Like there's stuff Jeremiah thinks is cool and he works on that, and stuff I think is cool and I work on that. But demand that we see in the repo for OAuth, we thought OAuth was going to be this tiny thing a couple of people were going to be excited about. And then we released it and we just had PR after PR of people being like, please support, I'm just going to make an example, WorkOS, or please support Google, or please support Azure single sign-on. And when people are showing up with PRs wanting to contribute those things, that's a really good signal that you're solving a problem and you're at that 99.9% again. And they just need that one extra thing in order to be successful. And so those kind of contributions are a really good signal that you're focusing in the right area. And that was exactly what I kept seeing with the Big Fix content, was just there's a huge amount of demand for this kind of stuff, and I could produce it relatively quickly at the time. As people were using it more, they were contributing back.
Was that also part of your full-time job, or was that project already completely on the side?
My full-time job was Big Fix, and so this was on the side of my full-time job. The reason it would be useful is because it was free and open. If it was closed and paid, we might have 2 customers and it would take 6 months to get a new customer, and then it would say small. And if it says small, it's not worth paying for. And I think you get that flywheel effect of having that content and those resources and those tools in the public, because then people use them and then they want to contribute back. And then it gets better. And because it's better, people want to use it. And as more people use it, they contribute back. And then as it gets bigger, more people use it. And so I think open source FastMCP or Big Fix or anything else really acts as a flywheel where the projects that get more use get more investment and more focus and continue to grow and get more use.
Circling back around a little bit, what would be the recommendation that you would have for somebody to get into open source? I mean, obviously you told a bunch of great stories that probably make it sound very, very compelling.
Yeah.
If I'm a junior developer today, where should I start?
2 things. 1, you don't need to write code to contribute into open source. You can start by helping fix docs. You can start by going to the discussion section of a repository and engaging with other people and saying, if I had that problem, how would I help solve it? And engaging with folks. I think another really good way to do it is to contribute to the projects that you're already working with. Projects that you have to work with at work, or projects that you're working with on your personal projects, because it means that you're a user of the project. You're not just like swooping in and saying, I'm going to fix this thing that I've never used, or I'm going to improve this feature that I've never leveraged. I think a big part of knowing what good looks like is using something that doesn't look quite good and wishing to yourself that I wish it worked in this different way. And then a lot of my contributions in other open source projects have been, man, I wish it worked this way. I wonder if they wish it worked this way too, and they just don't have the time or energy to make it work this way. And going in and filing an issue or starting a discussion and saying, do other people have this problem? Is this something other people struggle with? Because you might find that there's a workaround or some other way people are working around that problem, that they're not having the problem you're having. Or you might find that, after getting 15 thumbs up on the issue you posted, that might be an interesting place for you to invest your time. And proposing a solution and getting buy-in from the maintainers, a lot of the time they'll give you a lot of leeway to start working on a problem and propose solutions. And I think that's a really great way to contribute something small or something significant into an open source project. If you're really solving a problem you had, I think that's a really great way to start.
Fair, but now today also, I guess, is the age where code becomes very cheap, so to say. So what do you say has changed now with the new wave of AI coding agents, and how do you have to prepare to really stick out? Because I bet there's a lot of people opening PRs onto FastMCP these days.
That's a whole discussion on itself as to what happens if you just open a PR on the FastMCP repo. But yeah, it used to be that for a PR to land required a significant investment from the author. And so the author was incentivized to have those discussions first, to make sure that they didn't waste all of this time writing code that wasn't going to land. Now, a lot of the time writing code is almost free. And so we see lots of people swooping into our projects and trying to land very large PRs without talking first. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it is well aligned and they've done their research, but a lot of the time it's not. And we look at a PR and we're not sure why it's there. We're not sure what problem it solves, if it solves any problem at all. And so that collaboration part in the beginning where you file that issue, you see, is this a problem the maintainers are trying to solve? Is this a problem that other people have? Becomes even more important, because that's what's going to determine if your contribution is successful. It's no longer whether you can write the perfect 50 lines of code to implement the solution. It's whether the maintainers will accept your contribution, whether it's aligned with the goals of the project, whether the maintainers want to maintain your contribution after you land it. And then writing the code is almost the easy part. We really encourage folks, and it's actually a requirement in the FastMCP repo, to file an issue first, to start a discussion first, to get buy-in on the approach first, so that when we go to review your PR, we're already bought into the problem you're trying to solve. And then we're just deciding, is this the way we want to solve the problem? And it's way better to be in that situation. Is this code the exact code I want to solve the problem? instead of looking at a PR and arguing about whether the problem exists at all.
No, that's fair. How did you do it, by the way? I mean, you kind of jumped into the project after it already been around for a little bit. What were your first contributions and what are you working on right now?
Yeah, my first contributions were, as I said, I was using it to build MCP servers and I was having problems. And I would say, I'd get into discussions with Jeremiah where he's like, well, it doesn't work that way. And I'd say, well, the docs say, it does work that way. And so a lot of it was me trying to build more complex MCP servers. So not just a couple of tools, but what if I have one server that does 3 distinct sets of things and each one has its own set of tools, and how do I organize the code and bring that together in a way that's maintainable and testable, and really like pushing FastMCP to be able to handle more complex use cases. And so a lot of my initial issues were around that. It was like, how do I proxy between servers? How do I organize my tools into classes that are easier to test? How do I do dependency management so that I'm not like connecting to Redis inside of every tool that uses Redis, those sorts of things. And so we worked together a lot on those kinds of contributions initially. And then at some point, I started a discussion about tool transformation and agents and tools and things like that. And that really kicked off our collaboration together in the FastMCP repo.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point to double click on that. I think tool transformations are very interesting. Can you tell me what problem they solve?
So when I first was talking to Jeremiah about tool transformation, there was a MCP time server, and it was one of the public examples of an MCP server that you could go look at. And it had like one tool, maybe it had 2 tools. And the tool was convert time. So you would give it a time zone like America, Chicago, and a time, 5 p.m., and you'd say, what is the time in Bucharest or whatever? And then it would convert it for you. And in the description of this tool, it gave an example. So the LLM would see the tool, it would see the 3 parameters it takes, and then it would see the descriptions of source time zone, target time zone, time. And where you would put the time zone, it said the time zone you want to convert the time to. Example, America, Chicago, or America, San Francisco. And San Francisco is not a valid time zone. And I might have that backwards. It might be Los Angeles. But so the LLM, when it's converting for a California time, would pick America, San Francisco, and it would fail. And so you can go to the MCP time server repo and you can file an issue and you can wait for them to merge a fix and then you can wait for the next version. Or you can transform the tool and you can just change the description, and you can change the description to show a valid time instead of an invalid time zone. And so tool transformation is all about saying, just like we were talking about 99% of the way to what I want, tool transformation is all about saying that tool is 99% of what I want out of a tool. But there's just this one problem with it that I would like to change. And I don't want to wait a couple of weeks for the upstream maintainer to fix it. I don't want to write my own time zone conversion tool. I just want to make a small change to that one. And so whether it's like setting a default for a parameter, like maybe I'm always doing time zone conversions from Chicago to another time zone, I can just hard code the value to Chicago. Maybe I want to do validation on the parameters to say like the original server doesn't validate that it's between 0 and 12, and I want to add my own validation. And so tool transformation is just a way to get that last 1% out of the existing tools instead of going and writing your own. And so it's built into FastMCP, and you can do it as code. So you can write code that just wraps another tool really easily. Or you can do it when you mount an MCP server. So you can be like that JSON block for MCP. You can say mount this server and transform the tools like this. And it gives you a really cool experience.
I could imagine this also being very useful when you think about like very noisy MCP servers, like the Notion MCP server that would list you 1,000 tools. And you already know that your use case only needs 3 of those 500.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing it lets you do is you can apply labels to tools, and then we call them tags. And then you can say only allow tools with these tags. Or you can hide, as you said, tools. You can hide parameters on those tools. So maybe you have one Notion tool you use and the LLM is really only supposed to use 3 of the parameters. You could go to your prompt and be like, hey, Claude, you must only use this one tool and you should only ever provide these parameters. Or you can just make it so that that's the only option. And that's one of the really cool things about tool transformation is you can just really easily make it so the LLM can only do the right thing. Instead of using a prompt to try to convince it to do the right thing, you can make the right thing the only option.
Just a much better guardrail, I imagine, too.
Yeah, exactly. Guardrails, a lot of the time, I think of as like there's an option to do the wrong thing, and the guardrails are standing there being like, if you get too close, we'll push you back in. And tool transformation allows you to just say, that is the only option. You cannot make a mistake. You only have 3 parameters. You must fill them in. If you don't fill them in, that's an error. And so as you're thinking about taking a pipeline from something that's successful 80% of the time to something that's successful 99% of the time, limiting all of those distractions, the extra tools from the Notion server, the extra parameters on the tools that you know it doesn't need, by just removing those distractions, you can end up with much more successful pipelines.
One thing that just crossed my mind while we were talking about this, I think some of the popularity, at least some of the, I guess, the promise that people thought about when they saw FastMCP was also this conversion from having a fast API into a FastMCP server. And I think there's a lot of problems or challenges with that promise. Can you explain a bit more, and maybe also how tool transformations can help with that? Yeah.
Open API and spec conversions are really common ways to start with MCP. One of the problems that we have using spec conversions is these specs really aren't meant to be consumed by an LLM. And so if you were to go and grab the AWS Open API spec, you'll see it's several megabytes long. And so you can end up with specs that are larger than the context window of your LLM, and you haven't even gotten to the problem you're trying to solve. You're still just describing like the shape of the object that this one parameter and this one tool takes. And so it's super popular because it's very fast. You can take an API that you already have published, you can make it available as tools, and you can give it to an LLM. And then tool transformation allows you to still start with that as the foundation and then start hiding parameters, start hiding tools, start hiding arguments. And so you can start with something that is kind of a big mess, and you can kind of curate it into something that's workable. And it's a very popular way to make servers is starting with the schema and converting it to tools. But the size of the resulting tools and the size of the resulting schemas mean that it's not appropriate necessarily for every use case. But it's built into FastMCP, and it's one of the features that we get a lot of feature requests for better schema handling, for schema compression, for, again, it's 99% of the solution to a lot of people's problems, and figuring out how we get that last 1%. How do we handle auth in a consistent way? How do we handle parameter reuse and things like that are really interesting problems in that space. But a lot of our users just prefer to make the REST API call inside of a tool that they control, where they can specify the exact parameters and arguments that they want to. So it just depends on what you're trying to do and what problem you're trying to solve. But FastMCP can solve both of those problems really well.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into your work there. I think one other important item that you kind of already teased a little bit, and that Jeremiah was so excited. He wrote a blog article, which I caught up in preparation of this interview about, was the sampling feature, which I think it's a bit more complicated to explain, but can you please explain and try to give us the full picture? Because I think that's people should be really excited about this.
Yeah, sampling I think is getting a lot cooler. And so we used to joke that like 6 months ago, there was one sampling user in the world, and it was Bill Easton. It was me, and I was the one person. And then we actually found 2 other people. And so now we joke that there's 3 sampling users in the world. But it's kind of an issue of clients don't necessarily support it. And so that's changing. And that's something we're really excited about. But sampling, we can just totally ignore what it's called, because that won't give you any hints about what it does. In a normal LLM and MCP context, you have a very smart LLM that's producing text. And then you have a MCP server, which is telling you the weather or converting time zones or checking what Kubernetes pods you have deployed. But those are all like, you make a request and you get a programmatic response. It's like, here's exactly your pods in Kubernetes. Here's exactly the time zone conversion. And so what we like to say is the LLM is smart and the MCP server is dumb. It's just like taking exactly what you give it and giving you a response. And sampling allows you to put some of that smarts in the MCP server. To allow the MCP server to summarize things for you, or to use an LLM in order to produce smarter responses. So you might have a tool that returns the weather, and you might want to say in your tool, what clothing should you wear based on the weather? And you could hard code it to be like, if it's less than 32 degrees, then wear a coat. But with MCP, you can write a prompt. With MCP sampling, you can write a prompt that says, recommend a set of clothing options based on the weather. And then your tool, instead of just returning the weather, can return the weather and this summary. Other use cases that I've seen success with sampling are web search tools, where you say, please search the web and give me back the top 10 results. Well, with sampling, you can say, and a summary of the top 10 results. And then maybe you don't even show the top, you just show the URLs that you got those results from. And now you can write a really simple server where instead of handing back 10 or 50,000 tokens of raw web pages to the client, you can return back a 2-paragraph summary to the client along with the URLs that you used for the source. And so that's kind of the use case that sampling addresses. How sampling works is interesting too, I think. When it goes and it says, takes that prompt and says, here's the clothes you should wear, or here's the summary of those web searches, the server is actually asking the original client to do it. And so your original agent says, please do this web search. The server goes and gets those 10 pages, hands the pages along with a prompt back to the original client. And then the original client, your Claude Code or VS Code or whatever, spins up another thread and runs that prompt with those results and generates the response, hands it back to the server.
Almost like a sub-agent.
Yeah, exactly. And then the server combines the results with the summary and hands it back to the client. And it produces this really great workflow where the client actually has control over whether that prompt can run. It uses the client's LLM service, so you don't have to worry about data leaving your preferred LLM provider.
Or about paying the token cost.
Yeah, or about like how does that MCP server provider charge me for tokens now if they're using tokens for summaries. And with the latest MCP spec, sampling now has the ability to do tool calling, and sampling has the ability to return structured responses. And so now you can build whole agents just on top of sampling without having to bring in any agent frameworks, without having to bring in any SDKs. You can just build an MCP server, have an agent embedded in your tool that makes your tools much smarter and more reliable. And so we're really hoping that like the promise of sampling becomes the use case of sampling. It becomes how people actually use it. And FastMCP is the best way to get started with sampling tools and smarter tools.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting because we also have this notion here at CodeRabbit. We call that the MCP gateway, where we use sub-agents as well to control the verbosity of some of the MCP tools that you might use. And I can imagine that sampling could be very useful in that sense as well to kind of gate how much, like to really avoid context pollution, right, in your agents. Context. Yeah.
Context pollution, recommendations. So I'm querying a database and maybe the database MCP server gives back a recommendation for improving the query based on the query plan. Like you can imagine all of these things where, sure, I could dump the whole query plan back to the client and then maybe your customer service agent knows how to optimize queries. Or I could just pass back a recommendation. And so we're really excited about it for preventing context pollution in the web search example, as well as optimization and saying, hey, if you submitted that same tool call this way, you'll have a better experience. Or imagine a tool that returns an error because you provided the wrong parameters. And now you can say error recommendation, and the LLM can have next steps for what to do based on a prompt that the server author has written. So the expertise is in the server where the tool is, and you're handing recommendations out in error cases and things like that. So we definitely think it's going to be a really great way to improve the reliability of pipelines that involve agents too.
Yeah, it sounds super novel. Really excited for that. So we talked about tool transformations, very powerful tool, sampling, gaining more traction now. What else is down the road for FastMCP? Where do you see it moving?
As people move more and more servers into production, we're starting to see scaling questions. How many requests can I handle? How do I do caching? How do I do storage? How do I do dependency injection? How do I do authentication at scale? And so one of the things we're really proud of is FastMCP is consistently on the bleeding edge for support for new OAuth specs, new OIDC, as well as adding middleware for observability, for logging. We just merged OpenTelemetry support for tracing inside of your MCP servers for end-to-end tracing of your agent pipelines. As you're running it on your laptop, end-to-end traceability isn't necessarily your top concern, but when you're handling thousands of agent interactions a day, that end-to-end tracing is super important for understanding why somebody got a bad response. Why did somebody get no response? Why did a hallucination occur? Maybe because a tool call failed and you didn't know about it. And then as we start thinking about even more exciting stuff, now I have it working, now I have it running, now I have it at 80% reliability, you start talking about evals where you're saying like, I'm going to start tuning tool descriptions and tuning parameter description and tuning my agent prompts and seeing how the results change. And if you have end-to-end traceability of your pipeline, it becomes much easier to tell which changes had the biggest impact on your pipeline and to identify regressions in your pipeline. And then as you do evals for testing out different models like Opus versus Sonnet or Gemini versus Claude, evals make it really easy to know where you have regressions, where you need to make adjustments. And so we have folks who are doing things like pulling tool descriptions from databases to push into their FastMCP servers so that they can adjust tool descriptions live and have them immediately represented in every place that they're running the server. And stuff like that, I think, is really exciting for where this is going, to say, I got it working on my laptop, I got it working in production. Now's the time to get it working really well for my customers and making sure that we have the tools in place so that you can grow and continue to use FastMCP to handle 1 million requests a day.
Observability obviously is kind of your stronghold, right? So I can imagine that, especially since you mentioned now these questions coming up more and more, that means there's enterprise adoption at massive scale. So how do you manage that next to your full-time job? I mean, that seems like a big commitment. How does your day-to-day look like as a maintainer, and how do you recommend other people who are working in that field to manage theirs maybe from there?
I mean, Elastic is an open source company. And so at Elastic, I'm responsible for our open telemetry investments, some of the favorite older products like Logstash and Beats and other ones. And so working in that observability and is part of kind of my DNA a little bit. And FastMCP is a tool that we need to observe. And so one of the things that's really helped me with is putting me in the shoes of somebody who is building these pipelines, who needs an observability solution. And OpenTelemetry makes sure that whether you're using Elastic's observability solution or anybody else's, FastMCP is observable. The tools we build are observable. And we want to make it the best experience possible when you use Elastic products. But our ultimate goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to build an agent pipeline, for you to build MCP tools, for you to have a successful experience with your customer or your project or the fun game you're building or whatever it is. And so I view it as almost like professional development for me, like putting myself in a customer's shoes literally, not just going to their office, but like doing the things that they're doing and seeing the problems that they're having, deploy these out in the world. And I think that makes our investments better because we see the problems our customers are having and we feel the problems our customers are having. We don't just hear about the problems our customers are having.
MCP, FastMCP is a side project separate from your full-time job, right?
Yep.
So how do you split your time in a week between juggling responsibilities for Elastic, juggling work on that? Is there like a thumb rule that you apply to yourself, or how do you manage all that?
I think professional development is really important in any job you have. And so I try to set aside time during the week in order to make sure I can go out and contribute to Llama Index, contribute to Pydantic AI, contribute to FastMCP. And FastMCP is just such a cool project that I use myself at work. I host MCP servers. And so some of it's selfish, some of it's me going in and being like, I had these 5 bugs this week and I'm going to go work on those. But a lot of it is people posting issues that I will have. I will run into that issue in 2 weeks when I go and do that thing. And this person's almost giving me a heads up on the problem I'm about to have. Yeah. And I can solve it and ship it so that when I go to run that thing, it works for me the first time. I don't want to call them guinea pigs, but that's what it feels like sometimes. And so I enjoy working on it, and that certainly helps. And so something that I set aside time for.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It must be almost a little bit intoxicating when you see so many people using something that you worked on so dearly.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's great. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. I'd love to put you a little bit on some predictions for the future, if I'm okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot of kind of battle between frameworks in 2025, thinking about MCP as a protocol, which now is adopted by the Linux Foundation after Anthropic donated it. Then we had Anthropic themselves setting new frameworks with, skills MDs. We have OpenAI had, I think, the agents MD, right? And How do you see these entire agentic frameworks develop? Like if we talk about A2A from Google or whatever, do you think there's going to be a winner? What do you think are people going to use by the end of 26?
Oh my gosh, it's such an interesting question. And all of the things you mentioned, whether it's A2A or skills or MCP, they all solve different problems. And so I think at the end of the year, we're going to have A2A, we're going to have skills, we're going to have MCP. I think we're going to have a much better understanding of the Venn diagram between those things of what is the best thing for which solution, which problem. And I think that skills is going to be really interesting, allowing people to have agents that do more without having to go and build an MCP server. I think MCPs are going to continue to grow and be a really important part of reliable pipelines. And I'm super interested to see how multi-agent continues to evolve. And as we see smarter and smarter models like Opus and better tools and better harnesses around the models, how important is it to have multi-agent pipelines? How important is it to have really complex pipelines versus just saying, actually, Opus has gotten so much better that I can just give the whole problem to Opus, or the context window has gotten so much larger. It's 2 or 4 million tokens now in some of the upcoming models that maybe I don't need to batch up all of this work and send it down a pipeline to 5 different models and then converge the results. And so I'm really excited to see like a further simplification in a lot of the simpler use cases, but I don't have any big bets on multi-agent yet. I'm really excited to see agents inside of MCP servers, and that's kind of a way to do multi-agent where you don't actually know if the tool you just called is an agent behind the scenes, and I think that's where some of the real magic comes from. Is that maybe we do have multi-agent, but most people don't actually know that they're running multi-agent. They're running one agent, and they're interacting with servers and tools and websites that behind the scenes are using an agent in order to answer that request or answer that API call. And so my hope from a simplicity standpoint is that lots of us are building really great single agent pipelines and frameworks, but just that the whole world is so agentic that everything is kind of a multi-agent solution at the end of the day.
I mean, speaking about that definitely needs a protocol as well, right? So like MCP is a protocol there. A2A was suggested by Google. Where do you see the advantages and disadvantages of big companies or corporations defining these protocols? Because just to give an example here from your own backyard, FastMCP was kind of merged out of MCP, and then it got pulled in from the Anthropic team, or you kind of merged it in, and then it split out again. Maybe you can tell a bit about the background of that happening and what implications you think that should have on A2A or other protocols.
And as you look at like the last couple of weeks with like OpenClaw and ClaudeBot, it turns out that you don't need Google or Anthropic to decide something for it to become extremely popular. And so I think there's definitely value in large companies putting out these frameworks and specs, and A2A is a good example of something that has lots of enterprise buy-in. The initial Anthropic MCP spec, I think, was just a very small team or maybe even one engineer who built something, and then Anthropic threw it out into the world. And there hasn't been a lot of investment. The scale of investment from Anthropic and MCP has been relatively small. And so it required a community to come together and required lots of stakeholders to work together. And that's a good way to make sure that it's solving real problems, because people come and are interested and want to grow it to handle tool calling and sampling and to handle background tool calls and a lot of the things we're seeing coming out of MCP. One of the challenges you have when you put together a committee to solve a problem is now it's a year out before something's usable, and you're not getting the community growth of saying this is really solving a problem in production that people have, and you're not getting that experience where you're solving 99% of someone's problem and you just keep expanding it to solve additional use cases. So I spent some time with A2A when I was looking at like tools in agents in MCP servers. I had a hard time getting started with A2A, but I have heard of folks deploying it and being successful at it. So I'm definitely interested to see if the investment in A2A continues to grow, and if we see more A2A implementations inside of agent frameworks in particular. And I really want to see more problems people are solving with it, as you can spend all day reading about specs and ideas and LLM papers that people have written. But I think one of the beautiful things about FastMCP is you read about the problems people are solving with it. And I think that's how I prefer to be inspired on a lot of this stuff.
Was that the reason you forked back out again out of the MCP?
Yes, that was the question for sure. So that's a little bit of Jeremiah's story to tell. But as we talked about in the beginning, MCP is a spec. It's a reference implementation. It's not meant to be easy to use. And so when Jeremiah came out with something that was really easy to use, there was all this interest to say like, well, why wouldn't we take that really easy to use thing and fold it back in? And so that's what happened. And FastMCP 1 is part of the official Python SDK. But one of the things that I think we ran into was that official Python SDK also moves quite slowly. Because everything you put in it turns to Amber. It solidifies. It has to continue to work. You can't have breaking changes. It must work for everybody. And when Jeremiah and I want to sprint and go do tool calling with sampling and all these other things, it requires iteration, and it requires work with the community, and it requires us building something, shipping it into the world, and going, that's not quite right. We need to change that. We need to make a breaking change, and working with people who are using it to incorporate these to make it even better for the next person. And so when you're working in a spec, when you're working in a reference implementation, it's really hard to run and build something and then make a bunch of breaking changes and then come back. You really need to ship something that works for everybody. And so I believe the current plan is that in the official repo, FastMCP will be renamed to MCP server, and that FastMCP 2 and FastMCP 3 will retain the FastMCP name, and we'll continue to iterate as quickly as possible in FastMCP, and then we'll continue to upstream capabilities back to the core framework in order to make sure that that continues to grow. Hopefully by the time we're ready to do that, we've gone through our 3 iterations in FastMCP. We've gotten it working really well. We've gotten user feedback. We know that if we were to ship this, it would work for people. And so I think it's a really great relationship where we're kind of standing on the shoulders of the MCP giants. And
well, you're spearheading it.
I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but for a lot of our users, that's what it feels like. That if they want to build something fast and easy and scale it to production, FastMCP is the place to go.
There you hear it, folks. Well, I would love to close up with like a small lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you can either answer with one word or one sentence.
Sure.
And we'll try to keep it broad and brief, and then we'll wrap up here, okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So best FastMCP server you've seen out in the wild?
So if something's funny, it comes very close to my heart. So the first server, I don't remember if it was exactly a FastMCP server, but the first server that made me laugh out loud, I think, was posted on Reddit, and it was called isEven. And it was one tool, and you would give it a number, and it would tell you if that number was even or not. And I remember seeing that, and it came with this Reddit post that was like, finally, your LLM can accurately tell whether a number is even or not. I think my second favorite was one I produced shortly after that as a similar joke of a is nonsense MCP server, where you would pass it a paragraph or a sentence, and it would tell you whether it was nonsense or not. I was using it for like PDF to Markdown conversion, where you would take blocks and be like, is this garbled nonsense or is this text? But it was kind of funny to take like people's LinkedIn posts and, and put them into the is nonsense MCP and be like, okay, that LinkedIn post is nonsense. This one's good. That one's nonsense. On a day-to-day basis, like the GitHub MCP, those are all so great and useful. So
one of the features you worked on that you're quietly proud of?
Sampling is probably the one I'm the most proud of. That is me. Sorry. Sampling is the one I'm most proud of. I think that it enables some really cool use cases. And I'm really excited for the clients to catch up and people to start using it and show us all the ways that we never thought of to do smart tools and smart capabilities. And the really cool thing is it's not my idea. I didn't come up with it in the spec. It was just one of those things that landed, and then we're sitting here and being like, we really think that this is gonna get big. It's not ready to get big yet, but maybe if we keep improving it, maybe if we add tool calling, maybe if we add structured outputs, that similarly to OAuth and some other things that this is gonna take off. And so I spent like the last couple of weeks taking agent frameworks out of my MCP servers, removing Pydantic AI, removing OpenAI SDK, Gemini SDK, and just using sampling to replace agents. And it's like every PR is like minus 900 lines of code, minus 1,000 lines of code, minus 5 dependencies. And so I think that that's when something that used to be hard becomes easy, like the usage explodes. And so that's something I'm I guess not so quietly proud of.
No, but it's good. I mean, obviously we want to get more people on it, so try it out, and you should promote it. So that's great. One open source myth that you would like to kill could be something that you thought about previously, that open source was this, or something that you heard a lot from people telling you, oh, but open source isn't it this?
I talked about this a little bit before, and this is not going to be a controversial statement. But when I talk to people who are really interested in mentorship and getting started, it's a lot of the time like, I don't want other people to read my Python, or I don't think my Python is good enough, or I don't think, I've seen how other people's PRs get picked apart. What if that happens to mine? And I think a lot of the time, I said this earlier, you don't have to start with a code contribution. You can start with a docs contribution. You can start with fixing the README, with making it easier to follow, with finding code examples that are broken. You can help with discussions and helping other people solve their problems, and that helps you build up your expertise in the product. And so once you're more comfortable with the documentation, once you're more comfortable with how the parts work, now when you go to make your code contribution, you kind of know what you're doing, and you know what the code looks like, and you know kind of what good would look like. And so I think starting small and then growing and working with the maintainers is a really, really great way to get into open source. And you don't have to come into the repo and have a revolutionary idea where you change half the code base in order to implement it. You can come with, there's a setting missing, or this doesn't compile, or things like that, as a way to build rapport, to build trust, to be involved. And so I think my recommendation and one of the myths I would like to bust is like, start small.
Yeah.
Don't come in with the solution to every problem. Come with the solution to a problem, any problem, and work to get that solved and grow and go from there.
Yeah, really. And I mean, today also with AI, I guess, there's code review tools like CodeRabbit or whatever you choose to do that will help you with your PR on that sense, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. Writing the code and then reviewing the code. You can use your LLM as your pair programming partner and have it explain the code to you, explain if there are alternative ways to implement this. One thing that I really like to do is to ask the LLM, can you look at other code in this project? Is this done in the same way? Another one is your LLM has no problem looking at PRs in GitHub. And so you can say, can you look at the last 20 PRs and see what the maintainers flag in PRs? And can you make sure we're not doing any of those things? And just think about what you could ask your LLM to maximize the chance that your contribution follows the style in the code base, follows how a maintainer would do it. I even once sat down and was like, make a list of the maintainers and then look through their comments on PRs and tell me what each maintainer cares about, so that I know when I know what maintainer is going to be assigned to my PR, I can make sure that I'm not going to get any of the gotchas that everybody else has gotten from their reviews in the past.
Yeah, you just make me think. I'm going off my list here, but it seems to me like you have a very interesting workflow that kind of seems inspired from your work as a product manager. You're kind of prompting your agents in the same way. Can you explain what does your coding workflow look like?
I live in GitHub a lot of the time as a product manager across our products. And so a lot of my life is in GitHub issues. And without LLMs, that's where my life would end. And then an engineer would pick up the GitHub issue and plan it out and make a PR. And then another engineer would come in and review the PR, and maybe it would merge sometime later. What I really love to do, and you can find this on my repositories on GitHub, is I'll file an issue, and Claude, or in some of my repositories, CodeRabbit, will plan out, triage and plan the issue. This is how we should resolve the issue. These are the files we should change. These are the things we should do. And I'll give that a glance. If that looks good, Claude, make a PR. And now I've gone from maybe a title and a short description to a full triage from an LLM, and then a PR from an LLM. And then that PR gets created, and then code review kicks off, and maybe the LLM responds to the code review and fixes it, and then another code review kicks off. And then I'm looking at the PR after it's been iterated on 10 times by code review and an LLM, either saying, oh, well, this PR isn't going to work, and then I either iterate on it or close it or I merge it. And so in one of my projects recently, we did something like 500 PRs in 4 weeks following this. Claude was a PR every 15 minutes during the day. And these aren't one-line PRs. These aren't little docs edits. These are bigger PRs. And then that brings all of its own problems of if you're landing a PR every 15 minutes, how do you prevent merge conflicts? How do you prevent agents from working on the same thing and having to consolidate it? And so you get kind of better at being okay, I'm going to have them work on 8 things, but these 8 things are in 8 different areas so that we're not overlapping. Or I'm going to do a big refactor of the code base, so we'll only have one PR open for a little while we do this, and then we'll go back to this GitHub issue-driven workflow. And one of the things I really love about doing in GitHub issues is instead of having your prompt be hidden away in Cursor or on your Claude CLI, the whole prompt is sitting there in GitHub. It's the issue description, the plan, the feedback on the plan, and then making the PR. And so all of the input to that PR is sitting in GitHub. And then when you go to do your code review, the code review can look at the issue and be like, well, the original requirements were this, the original plan was this, and this PR doesn't do that. And so if you had made the whole PR in Cursor and then you post the PR, the code review agent doesn't have any context about your conversation, any of the back and forth, any of the changes in design you made while you were making it. That's all lost. And so I really love the public context, public prompt, public issue, public PR, public code review, everything just inside of GitHub, kind of asynchronous, so you can have 10 of them going at once. And then when I'm done with meetings at work, I can pop over for 10 minutes and merge, close, merge, whatever. So that's the workflow I'm really loving these days.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I feel like that's quite where a lot of people are moving towards, even though it seems like you're pushing it to the extreme, which is great to see. To wrap things up here, I think one last question that I guess I had that's kind of circling back onto this entire how do I get into maintaining and contributing in open source was like, is there a red flag that you have when you see, for example, somebody is either a new open source repository, it's their README, or it's a PR that somebody opens, something that people should avoid?
I think that one of the things that'll get your PR automatically closed in the FastMCP repo is not making an issue, not following the PR template. When it's really clear that you're not necessarily willing to engage in even like the basic requirements in the repository, it's highly likely that your PR is going to be closed. And so those are kind of the red flags of that I see when I look at them. When I look at GitHub projects, it's really hard to read because it's become so easy to make really great looking READMEs and really great looking documentation, and everything is about to change the world if only more people used it. And so sometimes you almost have to like look at the code, you have to run it, you have to like see if other people, how many stars does the repo have? But I think that that engagement level in the project is the clearest red flag for me when I'm looking at a new issue or a new PR.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think we'll leave it at that. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience? Maybe where can we find you online? How can we get involved? And anything exciting you want to announce?
So my middle name is Strawgate, and that's actually my handle on GitHub. So if you post an issue, if you have an issue making your first FastMCP server, maybe you have an issue with OpenTelemetry, feel free to tag me at Strawgate on GitHub when you make your issue. I'd be happy to look at it and help you get started, especially if it's sampling related or tool transformation, something on those lines. But I'm just really excited to see how people are using these tools. So if you go and you file an issue and you want to add a couple sentences about the problem you're trying to solve, the use case you have, I love reading those. So anytime you're interacting, the more you can tell us about your unique use case, the thing you're trying to solve, the happier we'll be helping you out.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And with that, to our audience, check out the repo. I think if you're building anything MCP related, you don't really have a way around it anyway. So let us know what you think in the comments, and see you at the next episode. Thank you.